Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go over 10 new infinite or game-winning combos with the new Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering cards. This is part 1 of part 2, so it will be a follow-up video with at least 10 more coming. But let's jump right into it with our first combo, which can get you infinite mill here in Pioneer or in older formats with the Water Crystal. Now the Water Crystal is 4 mana for a legendary artifact. It says blue spells cost 1 less to cast, but we're really after this mode that says if an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill that many cards plus 4 instead. And you can also additionally pay 6 mana to have your opponent mill cards equal to the number of cards in your hand, which is nice. But really combining this with Sphinx's tutelage, which is 3 mana for enchantment, says if whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and if they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. Now, this card actually has a little bit of a changed wording that says if any of the 2 cards or any of the cards that you mill this way would be put into the graveyard that share a color and are non-land, then you repeat the process. So what happens is if you have the Water Crystal and Sphinx's tutelage both in play and then you draw a card, it'll actually mill 6 cards with its ability. And then if any 2 of those 6 cards are non-land cards that share a color, you repeat it. And then you do 6 additional cards and then 6 additional cards, 6 additional cards. So if you're playing against an opponent with like a monocolored deck, most decks have more non-land cards and land cards, and most decks have shared colors of the cards in the deck. So it's pretty likely that you're going to be able to mill out your entire opponent with this combo if you have Sphinx's tutelage and the Water Crystal, because just 2 of the 6 cards have to share a color, and then you do it again and again and again. If you don't kill your opponent right then and there, you could use the Sphinx's tutelage ability to draw a card, or if you have any other sort of card draw, which isn't too hard to have in blue, obviously. Many card draw spells, many cards that cost just 1 mana to draw a card. You get to do the process again in case it does fizzle. So this is essentially infinite mill. Really depends on your opponent's deck, and there is some luck factor, but this basically will end the game. Same thing with Grindstone here, kind of does the exact same thing. Um, but if the cards share a color, you repeat the process. And so the Water Crystal makes that instead of 2 cards that you're milling from Grindstone into 6 cards, and then you repeat the process over and over again. Grindstone you can activate, each turn and kind of do that, or if you have a way to untap it, you can do it again and kind of get the process going that way. So this is almost infinite, maybe infinite. That's why I have a question mark here, but actually seems pretty powerful. Sphinx's tutelage is legal in Pioneer and Grindstone in Legacy, I believe. You could play both of them in the same deck in Legacy if you wanted to really get this going, but you could potentially even go like turn 1 mana acceleration, turn 2 Sphinx's tutelage, turn 3 Water Crystal, and then the next turn when you draw, um, this trigger will go off. If you have any other card draw, we'll kind of guarantee a win as early as turn 4, which is pretty good. So seems decent to me. Potentially constructed, uh, could be good in constructed in 60 card formats, but let me know in the comments below what you think. All right, let's move on to our next combo here. This is using the new Puff Puff UFO, I believe. 2 mana for a 0/4 construct alien with flying, and you can tap it to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. And then 3 mana until end of turn, you can change its base power to become equal to the number of towns you control. We don't care too much about this. This is another combo that is legal in Pioneer, I believe. Retreat to Coralheim and the Arid Archway, or really any sort of bounce land. There's many lands in Magic that when you play them, you can return another land back to your hand, and the Arid Archway does that. So that's really why you're using it. Now, Retreat to Coralheim says landfall, whenever land enters the battlefield, you choose 1. So really, we're going to be choosing the untapped target creature. So you can kind of see how this works. If you have the UFO out and the Retreat to Coralheim out, and you have an Arid Archway in your hand, you can tap the UFO to put the Archway into play. That will trigger the landfall to be able to untap the UFO. The Archway will bounce itself back to your hand, right? And then you tap it again, put it into play, untap it, bounce the cell back to your hand, just go over and over and over and over. What this does is it generates infinite lands coming into play, which can trigger landfall abilities infinite times. So there's a lot of cards in Magic that trigger whenever a land comes into play. Will be pretty nice with like the Iridescent Vine Lasher here, because it says whenever a land you control enters, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. So that would just end the game. You get infinite damage. But if you had any other landfall abilities or triggers when a land comes into play, that would trigger those infinite times, and so you can get those abilities infinite times. So not too bad, and you could even get this as early as turn 3 if you went Vine Lasher turn 1, UFO turn 2, and then retreat on turn 3, tap it if you had an Archway in your hand, and then go infinite. So an interesting combo. Could potentially be constructed viable, can kill on turn 3, but I don't know, does require a bit more setup and for specific cards. Although there are additional, like many other landfall cards that you could play in replace of the Vine Lasher. But let me know in the comments below what you think about this one. Okay, let's move on to the next combo here, using Kina, which is 3 mana for a 2/3. And it says if one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus a 1/1 green frog creature token are created instead. So this one is actually standard legal. You can also pay 2 to sacrifice a frog and put a +1/+1 counter on it. And it uses Leyline of Transformation and Essence of Orthodoxy. There you go. Got it. All of these are legal in standard. And Leyline Transformation says when it goes into play, you have to choose a creature type. So you're going to be choosing Phyrexian with this. The Essence says whenever it or another Phyrexian enters the battlefield, you incubate 2, which creates a incubator token, right? And then Kina says whenever a token comes into play, you make a frog. So basically, if you have all 3 of these out, you play the Essence, for example, that'll trigger it to make an incubate token, which then triggers the Kina, which will now be the 1/1 frog will now be a Phyrexian because of the ley line, and then that will trigger the Essence again, and that will trigger the Kina again, and then it just goes back and forth infinite times to make infinite, basically incubator tokens and frog tokens. Now there is no like May wording on any of these cards, so this actually will, like, I guess, draw the game, I think, if you do get all of these into play. So you need a way to disrupt the combo. If you have like a bounce spell or a removal spell or anything that triggers to do a damage when a creature comes into play or when a token comes into play or when an artifact comes into play, anything like that that would end the game and make this infinite loop actually kill your opponent, that would be ideal to have in play. So you don't want to just drop the game with your combo unless you want to, but probably want to just win with the combo. So you will need an additional piece or just some sort of way to sort of counter the ability would also work, or sacrifice one of your creatures. Anything like that would break up the combo. All right, and that one is standard legal. Let's move on to the Phantom Train. Again, this one is standard legal. This is 4 mana for a vehicle, a 4/4 with trample, and it says sacrifice another artifact or creature, put a +1/+1 counter on the vehicle, becomes a spirit artifact creature in addition to its other types until end of turn. So this card is notable because sort of a free sacrifice outlet, sacrifice any creature or artifact for free without paying any mana to be able to do that. And there is in standard a way to get infinite sacrifices if you have the Infernal Vessel and Valkyrie's Call out. Infernal Vessel says when it dies, if it wasn't a demon, returns to the battlefield under its owner's control with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and then it becomes a demon. And then the Valkyrie's Call says whenever a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return the card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter, and it has flying and is an angel. So essentially what you can do with if you have all 3 of these cards out, you can play like if you want turn 3 Vessel, turn 4 Train, turn 5 Valkyrie's Call, sacrifice the Vessel. They'll come back as you can choose between if you want it to be a demon or an angel, and then if you make it a demon, it will you could then sacrifice it again and have it come back as an angel, and then sacrifice it again and then come back as a demon, sacrifice again as an angel, and it just keeps going back and forth. You basically get infinite sacrifices out of the Infernal Vessel. Hopefully I explained that right. And then that would give you infinite +1/+1 counters on your train here, and you could attack for like infinite damage. essentially. So that would be pretty sweet with trample. Could be a turn 5 kill essentially with these 3 cards in standard. So kind of a fun, interesting one with a new uncommon here. Okay, let's move on to Vivy. Very powerful card, I think, but also has an infinite mana combo. This one legal in Commander and Modern, I believe, Quicksilver Elemental. So Vivy says if you can pay 0 to add X mana in any combination of blue or red, where X is its power, and you activate it only during your turn, only once each turn. Um, However, if you have Quicksilver Elemental out, it has an ability you can pay a blue and it gains all activated abilities of target creature until end of turn. So if you have these both in play and you pay the blue, Quicksilver Elemental will get Vivy's first ability, which you can then add because Quicksilver Elemental has 3 power. You can add um, 3 blue mana to your pool, and then you can use his ability again to gain Vivy's ability again, which then kind of resets it. So then the once per turn sort of goes away and comes back, kind of like blinking it almost, but you get that ability again. So now you have 2 mana in your pool, and then you activate it again. Now you're up to 5 mana. So you're basically spending 1 mana to get 3 mana, and just do that over and over again, and you can get infinite amount of mana, and then maybe fireball or whatever you want to do to win the game with infinite mana. But it is a way to get infinite mana. Kind of interesting too that you could potentially use Vivy to get the Quicksilver Elemental out a turn earlier if you had some sort of spell that pumped the Vivy to give it additional power, like a Monstrous Rage or something like that. The turn after you play it, and then you can use his ability to add blue, and then play the Elemental, and then use the Elemental, and just go off from there. So you can kind of go off a turn earlier with this combo using the Vivy itself to accelerate out the Quicksilver Elemental if you had a pump spell or something like that. So kind of an interesting combo, and pretty powerful potentially. Maybe more of just a commander kind of thing, but infinite mana, it's nothing to scoff at. So um, that's the Vivy combo. All right, let's move on to Esper Terra, or this comes from Terra, which is the original card here. The front side of the card is Terra, but we're using the back side of the card to basically create infinite Esper Terras. So you can flip Terra over by paying 6 mana, and then when you flip it over to Esper Terra, its first chapter is create a token that's a copy of target non-legendary enchantment you control. It gains haste. If it's a saga, you put up to 3 lore counters on it. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So essentially, if you play anything that, and it's a legend of note, the Esper Terra, if you play anything that creates a copy of it that makes it not legendary, you can then use the first ability to create a copy of itself. So, example, if you have Esper Terra and you play Spark Double, which says the creature enters with an additional loyalty counter on it, and it isn't legendary. So the key is it's not legendary. So now you have a not legendary copy of Esper Terra, and then you can create a token that's a copy of itself, right? And then you just kind of keep going, keep going, keep going. And it says if it's a saga, you put up to 3 lore counters on it. I believe because it says up to 3, you don't have to put any, or just 1 to create the copy over and over again, and then the last one you can just use to put 3 on and flip it over. So I think it just kind of works. They all have haste too, so essentially you're creating infinite 6/6 flying hastes, which could attack for infinite damage. So pretty powerful effect. There are some effects in standard that aren't great, but there are some effects in standard that could also um, make Esper Terra not legendary, I believe. But Spark Double is made the cleanest way, potentially. But let me know in the comments below any other ideas with this. Esper Terra is a very powerful card, and there's some interesting combos with it for sure. All right, let's move on to Noctis combo here, which is 4 mana for a 4/3 lifelink, and the ability is you can cast artifact spells from your graveyard by paying 3 life in addition to paying their other costs. And if you cast a spell this way, artifact enters with a finality counter on it. Now, this is an interesting card, and it kind of is um, muted by the fact that you have to pay 3 life every time you use this ability, and also that the artifact has a finality counter. So any sort of normal artifact you couldn't keep looping from your graveyard. However, with Mox Diamond, the way that Mox Diamond is worded is that it says if Mox Diamond would enter the battlefield, you can discard a land card instead. If you do, put it onto the battlefield, and if you don't, you put it into its owner's graveyard. So it never actually enters the battlefield when you cast it. If you don't discard the land card, so it kind of just goes on the stack and then goes straight into the graveyard. The way it's worded, and with Aetherflux Reservoir, it says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell that you cast this turn. You can pay uh, 50 life to deal 50 damage. Um, Between all three of these cards, if you have them out, you can play the Mox Diamond, and then you'd gain a life if it was the first spell you cast, and then you can pay 3 life to return the Mox Diamond, choose not to discard the land, go straight to the graveyard. That triggers the reservoir again to gain then 2 life, and then you do it again to gain 3 life, and now eventually you're netting life. So you have to have, I guess, some amount of life, like 6 or so life to start the combo here. But once you do that, once you get up to casting 3 or more spells, then you're starting to net life because your each spell is giving you an additional life um, off of the Aetherflux Reservoir, and then you can gain infinite life and then use its last ability to pay however much life you want to do 50 damage. Even if your opponent's at infinite life, you can do infinite damage to them. So, an interesting combo. There's some other ways to kind of make this work that require more cards, like countering your own spell, your own 0 mana artifact over and over again, because so it doesn't ever enter with a penalty counter. But this is kind of the cleanest way. I believe this is legacy playable. But yeah, this is an interesting Noctis combo, and kind of a 2 card combo. Using the third card costing 0 mana, you can kind of go off with the combo right away. I don't know if it's that playable because both of the cards are 4 mana, but kind of something interesting to explore. All right, let's go to Tifa combo here. So Tifa can actually give you a kill on turn 3 in standard using only just 3 cards. Um, Tifa is 2 mana for a 1/2 legendary human monk with trample landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, double its power until end of turn. So any effect that gives Tifa up to 5 power, such as Titanic Growth, and then you play a fetch land such as Fabled Passage, which will trigger the landfall twice. So Tifa's power goes up to 5, then it doubles to 10, and then that doubles again to 20. So you could again play Tifa on turn 2, turn 3, Titanic Growth, Tifa, and then play the Fabled Passage, crack it, and double the power twice, and get in for 20 trample damage. Pretty good. Pretty quick kill on turn 3. Could lose to removal spells, of course, as most creatures do. But blockers are not too much of a problem. I mean, if they would have to block to not die, typically. So kind of force a block, but also would get in for a ton of damage. So I could see this being potentially pretty powerful in standard. Maybe Tifa kind of going into some of the like red green like pump my own creature decks, playing some Fable Passage, or maybe just a landfall aggro deck with some pump spells as well. It does work with any other pump spells or ways to get her up to 5 or more power. So like 2 giant growths would work, something like that. Could also work, and then that would do even more trample damage, but that does require a bit more cards. This is kind of the simplest way to do 20 damage on turn 3. So pretty powerful, and we'll see if this makes a dent in standard or not. All right, so let's go to an infinite turn combo here with Ultimia, the Time Sorceress, which is 5 mana for a 4/5, and it says when it enters attack, surveil 2. At the beginning of your end step, you can pay 8 mana to exile 8 cards from your graveyard, and if you do, transform it. It transforms into a 7/7 menace, but most importantly, it says when it transforms into the Omnipotent, you take an extra turn after this one. So if you can transform this multiple times, you can get multiple extra turns from it. Now, just as it is, you can transform it for 8 mana and 8 cards. That's kind of a lot. So if you have an Agatha's Soul Cauldron with any creature that has like an activated ability that says to transform the card, you can then tap the Soul Cauldron to give Ultimisia a +1/+1 counter on it, right? and then you can pay the transform cost. Say, for example, the captive weird here. There's a lot of cards that you could use instead that have like an activated ability to pay mana for transform cost, and you would pay 3 or pay 4 mana to flip it over, and then it just says when it transforms. It doesn't have to be because of its ability. Then you get the extra turn. Then you can transform it back for another 4 mana during your extra turn. And if you have another 4 or 3 mana with life, then you can flip it over again, get an extra turn, and just keep flipping it back and forth as long as you have the mana to do so, which you will because you get to untap your lands every turn. Essentially, if you have the right colored mana, you will need some red mana, for example, if you're using the Captive Weird, to keep flipping it unless you have a lot of life. But this will give you essentially infinite turns if you're able to flip it back and forth over and over again. And that would probably win you the game. Interesting combo here. Could be some sort of janky combo I try to pull off on the channel. We'll see. But yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments below. All right, let's go to our last one for today, which is Jumbo Cactuar, everyone's favorite Cactuar. This is a giant plant token with 10,000 needles, and it says when it attacks, it gets plus 9,999 power. So it gets up to 10,000 power because it starts with 1. Um, the problem with this card is that it can be blocked, chump blocked. It doesn't have any evasion. And it also just, you play it on turn 7, or you can ramp into it if you want to. But then your opponent will like sweep the board, kill it, or do something to, it gives them a turn to react to it, basically, because it doesn't have haste. So if you find anything that gives it both trample and haste, or evasion and haste, that's a pretty good combination to make this much more likely to attack for lethal right away. So the Frost Cliff Siege, for example, has the teamer mode here. Creatures you control get an additional power and have trample and have haste. So exactly what you want to be doing with this. So you could play that out on turn 2 or 3 if you have like a Landwar Elves, and then maybe ramp into the Cactuar, or there's other ways to sneak it into play as well, reanimate it, something like that, and then attack right away. This would actually be 10,001 damage because the teamer adds an additional power, just in case it wasn't enough. But yeah, we'd have trample and haste, and you could win the game right away, most likely, if if your opponent doesn't counter it in some way or destroy your creature. But this is maybe the best, one of the easiest ways to kind of get the Jumbo Cactuar to win you the game immediately. There's other ways to kind of give it trample or evasion, but the siege here gives it both haste and evasion, so a pretty nice combination. All right, so that is it for our infinite combos. Let me know in the comments below what you think about them. I got at least 10 more coming in the next day or two, so look for part 2 coming up on the channel. This was just part 1 of 10 combos. Yeah, and let me know which ones you think are constructed viable, any other cool combos or brews that you're working with Final Fantasy. Love to hear about them in the comments below. Again, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video.